There are those who carry pain like a sacred duty, not because they must, but because somewhere deep inside they believe suffering is their purpose. I've known many empaths. They do not run from darkness, they absorb it. They do not turn away from brokenness, they offer themselves as the vessel. But this is dangerous. When you confuse pain with meaning, you bury your true self under the wounds of others. And today, I must show you the difference before your purpose becomes your prison. You have come to listen not merely with your ears, but with your soul. And so I shall speak to that innermost chamber of your being, where the archetypes stir, where the dream images rise like smoke from an ancient fire. In our time together today, let us walk through the psychic terrain of the empath, not as a casual traveler, but as one who knows that beneath the soil lies not only bone but truth, myth, and the forgotten God who still whispers through your suffering. Empaths, those individuals who so often confuse the suffering of the world for their own, are not merely born, they are formed. They emerge like iron forged in the unconscious furnace of 1,000 generational wounds. Their heightened sensitivity is not simply a gift, it is a curse and a calling, a burden they mistake for virtue. And this is where we must begin. Not with sentimentality, but with brutal honesty. Pain is not always purpose. When I say that, I do not mean that pain has no meaning. On the contrary, suffering is the prima materia of transformation. But there is a hidden danger when the empath, in their unreflected state, assumes that their pain is sacred simply because it exists. What is unconscious in you will be projected onto the world as fate. And so many empaths live in the perpetual cycle of absorbing wounds, bleeding internally while smiling outwardly, convinced that their pain is their mission. This is not individuation. This is imprisonment. The empath, when undeveloped, is still possessed by the mother archetype, the great mother who both nurtures and devours. The archetype of care, when split from consciousness, becomes a tyrant, cloaked in tenderness. The empath gives endlessly, not because they are whole, but because they are empty, and in giving they hope to be filled, but the unconscious does not reward this strategy. It demands confrontation. It demands one descend into their own darkness and sort through the inherited stories that whisper of martyrdom and shame. And yet, the unconscious is patient. It will wait, decade after decade, until the empath collapses. Not from lack of love, but from a lack of boundaries. Their aura becomes a sponge. They feel the sorrow of others as if it were their own, mistaking resonance for responsibility. They mistake identification for love. They see someone drowning and jump into the ocean without realizing neither of them can swim. This illusion, this conflation of pain and purpose is fed by collective complexes. Our culture glorifies suffering. It preaches that the one who endures the most is somehow the most noble. But nobility without consciousness is just a mask worn by the wounded child who still seeks validation from a parent long gone. The empath wears this mask so convincingly that even they believe it. But what they truly need is not more to feel, it is to feel what is truly theirs. You see, the unconscious will flood a weak ego with sensation to awaken it. The empath is flooded not because they are gifted, but because they have not individuated. Their boundaries are permeable. The persona they wear is that of the helper, the healer, the saint, but the shadow whispers of resentment, fatigue, rage. It tells the truth. I am tired of feeling for everyone else. And that truth, though buried, will surface. It always does. I once studied a woman who could not walk through a room without absorbing the emotional states of those within it. She prided herself on this ability, calling it her empathic gift. But as we worked, we unearthed a childhood where she was rewarded for being attuned to her mother's moods, punished if she failed to anticipate the storm. She learned to survive by merging, and now, decades later, she still survived that way through fusion. Not freedom, her pain had become her compass. And every wound in the world called to her like a siren. But this is not purpose. This is conditioning. This is trauma masquerading as compassion. And until it is seen, it rules the soul. The way forward is not to shut off feeling, but to differentiate it. To ask, is this mine? Does this pain belong to my soul's journey? Or have I picked it up like a stone placed in my pocket by another's sorrow? The unconscious is a trickster. It speaks in riddles, in projections, in dreams. It will show you your wound by wrapping it in another's face, but do not be deceived. Every face you long to heal is a mirror. Every ache you chase is your own, calling to you in disguise. The work is not to carry more. The work is to discern. Empathy must be married to wisdom. Otherwise, the empath becomes the fool running into burning houses to save shadows. And so many do, because to feel is easier than to ask. Why do I need to feel this to feel real? That is the question that breaks the spell. Let us now descend deeper. Let us speak of dreams. The dream world of the empath is littered with symbols of merging water, waves, floods, always inundation. The dreamer often finds themselves drowning or attempting to save someone from drowning. These are not idle metaphors. They are psychic alarms. The water is the collective unconscious, and the dreamer is overwhelmed, not by their own soul, but by the unlived lives of others. This is the cost of psychic permeability. It is not holiness, it is helplessness. But when the dream changes, when the water becomes a river and the dreamer finds a boat, then we know the ego is beginning to hold. Then we know the empath is beginning to separate two individuate. They are learning to sail the currents, not be consumed by them. This is the beginning of transformation. The journey of the empath who begins to question is a sacred one, for it is the moment the self starts to awaken from the enchantment of projection. No longer content to be the silent vessel of collective pain, the empath begins to wonder, what if my suffering is not a divine sign, but an ancestral echo? This is the threshold. It is narrow, trembling, and lonely, for to step across it is to step away from the applause of self-sacrifice and into the solitude of self-awareness. At this stage, the unconscious may retaliate. The ego, once passive and porous, begins to assert itself. And with that comes fear. Am I becoming selfish? No. You are becoming sovereign. The self must reclaim its throne from the tyrannies of other people's expectations. The empath begins to see that not all feelings are instructions and not all wounds require intervention. Some are invitations to observe, to witness, to learn, but not to carry. Here is where the archetype of the wounded healer enters, not as a myth from a dusty tome, but as a living pattern within the soul. The wounded healer does not heal by absorbing suffering, but by transforming their own Chiron the centaur, who could not heal his own wound, teaches us that it is through the liminality of our injury that insight arrives. But insight is not the same as identity. The empath who adopts pain as identity forfeits transformation for martyrdom. They remain pierced but never initiate the alchemical fire. Do you understand what I mean when I say alchemical fire? It is the symbolic flame that burns away illusion, but only if one has the courage to remain in it. To hold the pain, not as a cross to bear forever, but as a crucible to let it burn and watch what emerges, not the same self, not the same story, but something stranger, more whole, more dangerous in its authenticity. This is the shadow-integrated empath, the one who no longer reacts but responds, no longer absorbs but reflects. Let me share with you a dream, not mine, but one offered by a patient in great despair. She dreamt she was in a cathedral made of glass, and every time someone cried nearby, the walls would crack. She ran endlessly from room to room, sealing the fractures with her own blood. When she woke, she wept, believing this to be her holy purpose. But when we explored further, I asked her, "Whose cathedral are you guarding, and why must your blood be the mortar?" She fell silent. That silence was the beginning of her rebirth. This dream is archetypal. The cathedral is the collective ideal. The empathic woman lives to preserve it. Peace, harmony, connection, but does so at the cost of herself. Her blood is not symbolic healing, it is depletion. And the cracks, you see, are not a problem to be fixed, but a revelation to be faced. The cathedral must shatter for the inner temple to emerge. There is a moment in the individuation process when the empath realizes they are not here to save others from their pain. They are here to witness the birth of their own self through that very same pain. And that is no small task. It demands that you withdraw the projection of purpose from suffering, that you see pain not as proof of goodness, but as a call to examine the unconscious contract you have signed. Who taught you that your hurt makes you holy? Who convinced you that to be loved you must bleed? These questions are surgical. They open what the false self has stitched shut. But in their asking, they reveal the inner orphan, the psychic child, who made a pact long ago. If I feel for everyone else, maybe someone will finally feel for me. This is not empathy. This is abandonment disguised as care. To integrate this truth is devastating. And yet, it is also liberation. You begin to discern that boundaries are not walls. They are rivers, banks. They give shape to the flow of your soul. You begin to recognize that love without discernment is possession. That to feel everything is not a spiritual gift, it is a spiritual bypass. A refusal to descend into the underworld of your own unique becoming. For the empaths must go into their own darkness, or they will forever be ruled by the darkness of others. Now let us consider the myth of Persephone. Abducted into the underworld, she becomes queen not by resisting Hades, but by eating the pomegranate, by choosing to partake. This is what the empath must do. Not resist the underworld, but enter it consciously, to choose to feel what is theirs and to leave the rest behind. Only then can they return to the upper world bearing the seeds of truth. The empath who begins to individuate often experiences a terrifying emptiness for what is left when one stops absorbing. What remains when one no longer serves as the sponge of the collective? In that silence, the soul is revealed. It is not loud, it is not grand, it does not demand applause. It speaks in stillness, and in its voice, the true calling of the empath is found not to absorb, but to transmute, not to feel for others, but to feel with wisdom, and sometimes to feel nothing at all. Can you accept that not every ache must be yours, that detachment is not cruelty, but clarity? That the most loving thing you can do is to let another walk their own path, even into pain, even into loss, because only there will their own soul rise to meet them. This is the sacred detachment of the healed empath. They are no longer looking to be loved through service. They have retrieved the projection of their worth from the altar of other people's emotions. They no longer mistake the tremble of their body as a divine instruction. They ask always, what is mine? And if the answer is silence, they honor that too. In this space, the archetype of the magician begins to stir. The magician is not concerned with suffering for suffering's sake. He transmutes, he works with symbol, with energy, with dream. The healed empath, now touched by the magician, becomes a channel, not a container. The pain passes through but does not stay. The emotion flows, but it is not housed. This is true psychic hygiene, and it is sacred. And now we arrive at a paradox. The empath who ceases to identify with pain becomes more truly empathic. Strange, is it not? For in relinquishing the addiction to suffering, they become capable of true compassion, rooted not in need, but in presence. They see pain, and they no longer rush to fix. They feel pain, and they no longer confuse it with moral superiority. They can sit in the company of sorrow without becoming it. This is the strength of the differentiated self. This is psychic maturity. Let us now pause to examine the dream work of the transformed empath. Whereas before their dreams were floods, drownings, and collapsing buildings, now they begin to dream of thresholds, of keys, of rooms previously locked. These symbols do not arise by accident. They are the language of the unconscious, signaling movement into new psychic space. A dream of finding a key under one's tongue, for instance, reveals the power of one's own voice, reclaimed. To dream of walking a path alone without fear signals the emerging autonomy of the self. The inner architecture of the empath is shifting. Where there was once absorption, now there is discernment. Where there was once fusion, now there is dialogue. The unconscious is no longer erupting in desperate storms, but responding to the empath's conscious inquiry. This is no small achievement. It is the fruit of the long interior journey through shadow, through myth, through wound, and yet the process is never finished. We are never fully healed. We are ever becoming. The danger lies in mistaking awakening for arrival. The archetype of the hero may appear at this stage, seductive in its promises. You've conquered your shadow now, go and heal the world. But beware, the hero's path, when unbalanced, feeds the ego's need to be needed. The healed empath must resist the call to conquer. Instead, they must become the witness, the one who sees, who holds space, who neither absorbs nor abandons. The witness archetype is quieter. It does not demand recognition. It listens more than it speaks. It is here that true influence begins. Now you may ask, but if I am no longer here to feel everything, what is my purpose? And this is the most sacred question of all, because purpose, my friend, does not arrive through pain, it arrives through pattern. You must look to the repeating motifs in your life, the conversations you are called into, the themes that haunt your dreams, the fears that follow you like shadows at noon. These are not accidents, they are psychic threads waiting to be woven, and so I urge you, trace them, map them, dialogue with them. For your purpose is not a task, it is a symbolic unfolding. The empath's mistake is to seek meaning in affliction, but meaning is not something you find, it is something you make. Through conscious engagement with the symbols of your own life, through the synthesis of your wound, not the glorification of it. Let me share another case. A man who had spent decades in spiritual communities, revered as a gifted intuitive. He could sense the emotions of others like wind on his skin, but he was chronically ill, chronically fatigued, and secretly resentful of the very people he helped. They drained me, he confessed, but I can't stop. When we excavated his dream work, we found a recurring motif, a glass house filled with strangers, all holding mirrors, all pointing them at him. He would scream but make no sound. The mirrors, I told him, are the projections of others. You live in a house of reflections, but you've forgotten your own image. Your gift became a prison because you never asked why you had to use it. What if you could feel without fusing? What if you could help without hosting their pain inside your body? He began to weep, not from despair, but from relief. The psychic contract was dissolving. You see, empaths often confuse availability with love, but availability without boundaries is self-erasure. The ego must become solid enough to choose when to feel and when to rest, when to engage and when to walk away. This is not coldness, it is compassion with roots. A tree that cannot hold its own shape cannot shelter anyone. This brings us to the image of the tree of life. In many traditions, it is the axis mundi, the bridge between the worlds. It draws from the underworld. It stretches to the heavens, but it is rooted firmly in the earth. The empath must become such a tree, deeply rooted, or else they are blown over by every storm of feeling. They must draw from their own well, not steal water from others' sorrows. Only then can they offer true shelter. Only then are they not rescuers, but guides. In dream symbology, a tree bearing fruit often appears after long periods of psychic drought. This is a sign of integration. The self is no longer split between I feel for you and I do not exist. There is now a third stance, I exist with you, but not as you. This is the posture of true empathy, and it is learned only through the fire of unlearning. So let us unlearn. Let us unlearn the lies that feeling everything makes you holy. Let us unlearn the belief that to be good is to be wounded. Let us unlearn the collective myth that the suffering servant is the highest archetype of love. There are other archetypes, the weaver, the priestess, the alchemist, the sage. They do not bleed to prove their virtue. They see, they sense, they speak in symbols, and they serve without self-sacrifice. This is the future of the empath. This is their true initiation, but it cannot be done alone. You must have witnesses. You must have mirrors who do not distort you. You must find those rare few who do not reward you for hurting, but for healing, who do not measure your worth by how broken you are willing to be for them. These are your true tribe, not the ones who praise your sensitivity, but the ones who protect your becoming. They do not worship your pain. They honor your emergence, and most importantly, you must become that witness for yourself. To see your own wound without collapsing into it, to tend your own ache without needing it to define you, to look into the mirror and say, I am here, I am whole. I do not need to suffer to shine. There is a silence that comes after the storm, not the silence of numbness, but of clarity. The empath, having descended into the archetypal night and wrestled with the illusion that pain equals purpose, now emerges as something else. Not hardened, but defined, not detached, but distinct. They are no longer the open wound, they are the scar that sings. In this stage, the dream world changes yet again. Water becomes light. The empath may now dream of guiding others across bridges, of holding lanterns in vast caverns, of touching strangers without being consumed. These are not symbols of martyrdom. They are signs of psychic sovereignty. The self no longer needs to drown to prove its depth. It no longer bleeds to prove. It cares. The light has entered the wound not to erase it, but to make it conscious, and this consciousness ripples outward. The healed empath does not preach. They emanate. Their energy no longer begs to be needed. It offers presence without persuasion. They do not rescue, but they resonate, and this resonance draws forth only those who are ready not to be saved, but to awaken. They become, in mythic terms, the sacred mirror, not the one who reflects others in place of themselves, but the one who reflects others to themselves. They no longer distort to please, they clarify to liberate, and in doing so, they begin to see that what they mistook for divine burden was always a threshold. You see, purpose is not found in pain. It is found in what you do with pain, in what you shape from it. The empath who creates through art, word, ritual, presence, transmutes their suffering into symbol, and symbol is the bridge between the personal and the collective. Symbol is what heals. I knew a woman once who wrote poetry that made the bones of the forgotten ache. When I asked her where it came from, she said, "From the ache I no longer carry." Her words did not plead. They illuminated. That is the difference between the empaths in bondage and the empaths in bloom. One recites their wounds, the other offers what bloomed through them. This blooming requires death. The death of the identity that was built around feeling everything, the death of the savior persona, the death of the false humility that hides a desperate need for meaning. Death, as in all myths, is followed by rebirth. But the reborn empath is almost unrecognizable. They smile less often, but more truly, they say no without guilt. They listen without absorbing. They walk alone, not out of exile, but out of choice. Their dreams now feature thresholds, skies, keys, fire that warms but does not burn. They begin to write their own mythology, not a script of inherited martyrdom, but of emergence. They stop asking, what do others feel, and begin asking, what is true? And sometimes the truth is still painful, but it is theirs, and that makes all the difference. At this stage, the archetype of the sage may appear not as an old man with books, but as a quiet knowing. The sage within the empath does not scream to be heard. It waits, it watches, it only speaks when the words build bridges, not chains. The sage carries a lantern, yes, but not to guide others out, to remind them they carry their own. And now, let me speak directly to you, yes? You who have felt too much, too often, for too long. You who were praised for your empathy but never taught to wield it. You who confuse exhaustion with virtue, sadness with spirituality, merging with love. You are not here to carry the pain of the world. You are here to transform it, and transformation begins with claiming what is yours and releasing what is not. You must let the river run through you, not drown you. You must learn to walk beside the hurting, not collapse with them. You must become the stone in the stream, not unmoved, but unmoving in your essence. And that essence, my dear empath, is not your pain, it is your pattern. Your pattern is how your soul folds into the fabric of this world. It is in the way you love, not bleed, in the way you see, not absorb, in the way you hold space, not hold weight. This is your gift, not to feel everything, but to feel what is true, not to save everyone, but to stand so fully in your being that others remember how to stand in theirs, not to suffer for meaning, but to make meaning from suffering. This is individuation, this is alchemy. This is the empath who no longer mistakes pain for purpose. The final dream is often one of flying not away, but through wings of gold, often heavy at first, but finally light as breath. The flight is not escape, it is emergence. The air is not distance, it is clarity. So I leave you with this: may your wings be strong, not from bearing weight, but from knowing when to let go. May your gift not be your pain, but what you make of it. And may you remember, feeling deeply is not your burden, it is your raw material. It is not your identity, it is your invitation. Answer wisely.